Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And this is the end of the year, end of 2022, and we're going to do a few special episodes to wrap up the year and launch us into next year. So we'll just get right into it, but here's the plan for the next 3 episodes. This episode, we're going to talk about some of our favorite, maybe more academic history of the year. So books and papers and other research that felt like it changed our thinking about history and maybe gave us something that we will carry forward into next year. And then the second episode, we're going to do the same, but kind of more pop history. So books, podcasts, Twitter threads, magazine articles, whatever. And then the third episode is going to be Ask Us Anything. Any questions you have for us about history or inspiration or how we make the podcast or really anything at all, you can ask us that. So that's the plan. And here, as always, for those 3 episodes and into 2023 as well, of course, not just those 3 episodes, are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Happy holidays, Jody.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Hey there.
Hey there.
Happy holidays.
A couple more housekeeping things and then we'll just get right into it. But look, listeners, if you have any questions for us, anything at all, we're going to record that episode, I think, the day after you are hearing this. And so if you have a question, a quick question, get in touch with us real quick. I'll just say it right off the bat. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com or find us on social media. Really anything at all, obviously, about Kelly and Nikki's work in history, anything about this podcast or, my work in podcasting. I have 2 cats. Nikki has
I was about
a dog.
to say,
Yeah.
ask about Nala. She's doing well.
Yeah, there you go. You can ask.
I have
There
3
you
kids.
go. You can really ask anything at all, and we'll try and get to as many questions at all as we can. We'll try and get to as many questions as we can, and a bunch have already started to come in on social media and through the newsletter and so forth. So that's great. And then. Yeah, let's get into it. Again, this episode is going to be about sort of the more academic side of history. And this isn't exactly like our favorites of 2022 and like try and recommend a bunch of stuff, in part because this is coming out like you probably don't have time to do that. If we wanted to recommend you like 6 books to read over the break, it's too late for that. I'm interested in hearing from the 2 of you as working academics, kind of if there's any work this year that really felt like it changed, like I said, it changed your thinking, advanced your thinking, reframed stuff in your field or another field. And so I don't know who's going to start. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm going to start. So there's a lot of books I've read this year. I have to read all the time, mostly because I'm a historian, but also because I've been on these like prize committees in which we select books and we get like 30 books, 50 books, 60 books. It's a lot of reading. But one book that blew me away, I'm holding it up. They can see it. You guys can't. But it's Carrie Greenidge's The Grimke's, The Legacy of Slavery in an American Family. And it's so good. I've been waiting for the book on the Grimke's for a really, really long time. They're a famous slaveholding family, a famous abolitionist family, and they're so complicated that I didn't know who was going to be able to tell this story with such like care, but Carrie really does that. She's been a guest on our show before, and really what she looks at is like 2 sides of the same family. So for those who don't know, the white Grimke's, they're the Grimke's, but I'm saying the white side of the family, were major slaveholders in South Carolina all the way back to the colonial period. They owned, hundreds of slaves throughout their family. And during the 1800s, 2 of their daughters become some of the most famous abolitionist women of their time. And that is Sarah and Angelina. They pretty much disavow their family. They leave South Carolina. They move up to the north. They live in Philadelphia, and then they also settle sort of in Boston. They write one of the first major publications by a woman about anti-slavery issues and anti-slavery issues. And they're just explosive on the American scene. And while they're doing all of this abolitionist work, they find out that their brother had a child with an enslaved woman, had children, really, with an enslaved woman. And these 3 children pretty much managed to escape slavery and educate themselves. And these 2 sisters say, okay, we're going to help you. We're going to help educate you. We're going to pay for your education. They become, 2 of the brothers become really successful. Archie goes to Harvard Law. Francis goes to Princeton Theological. And they become these great race men, these great leaders of the NAACP, running one of the most prestigious Black churches in Washington, D.C. They're this incredible family. So all of that sounds good and dandy until you realize, like all families, they are pretty messed up. They are really messed up. And it's not just this nice sweet bow that you can put on it. And so I love it because in the beginning of the book, she has like this cast of characters, because it's a lot of names that get used over and over again. And sometimes you can get a little confused with like, is this the white Angelina or the Black Angelina? You also find out about Frances, who marries another famous Black abolitionist, Charlotte Thornton Grimke. I think I've said before, my kids are all named after abolitionists, and Charlotte Thornton Grimke is one of my daughter's namesakes. But it's just remarkable to see how they navigate racism, how they navigate colorism, because the Black side of the family becomes really intense about like how light skin or dark skin you are. Also, she tackles something that most people don't tackle in the 19th century, which is this idea of queer identity. Angelina, the daughter of Archibald, is a Black woman who becomes a playwright and highly successful, but she's also gay, and they don't know how to handle that in the 19th century. And so every time she gets in a relationship with another woman, she gets kicked out of school. So she gets kicked out of multiple schools and sort of shuffled all over the country because they don't really know what to do with her. And there's just so much here. Like, you pull on every little string and it just is so chewy, as they say. There's so many different aspects to it that just blew my mind. And I don't know, long after I finished it, it still sat with me.
When you said, we should say, we'll put links to all of these recommendations, and we'll send out a newsletter with all of it as well. But this one is the Grimkes, Carrie Greenwich. But when you said you were unsure if someone would be able to pull this off, what do you mean by that?
Because it's massive. I mean, like, she pretty much goes from the 18th century, from the colonial period, all the way up to the 20th century, tracing the lives of the matriarch, the patriarch, the first Grimkes, and then the next generation and the subsequent generation, and all throughout the 19th century. And then she looks at all of their descendants, which is really hard to do, at least for the descendants that she has. Like, John is one of the brothers, and sort of the paper trail ends with him. She doesn't know if there are any descendants from him. Angelina is really the last child. She dies in, I think, 1978. So she's the last of like the Grimke line, so to speak. But it's a big work to do family history, I think, especially history that most people rather not have on public pages. They really don't want you to know what they wrote in their diary or what they said to their brother or what they said, in between other family members. And this really gives you a portrait. I think it's very much a portrait of America in the sense that it's messy, it's complicated, it is not neat and sweet. And you find out that these abolitionist sisters are like low-key racist, like, for lack of a better word. I mean, there's just so much. And you find out that even the Black descendants are low-key elitists. Like, they really despise Black people who haven't made it for themselves, which is astounding. So there's so much in the book that I think is telling about how people were thinking then and also where we are right now.
And just as a narrative feat, I mean, I've been wanting to read this book ever since I heard about it. But the way that you take all of those different threads and keep people interested for the entire time, it can be a real challenge. And I love that it has like the Lord of the Rings sort of style list of characters in the front.
It does.
Hand-drawn maps.
She's such a gifted storyteller. I mean, like, one of the things Carrie does in the book that she won't just tell the story, she describes it. She'll say, like, it was a sunny day, the birds were chirping, the blue chip off the, house was paint off the house was chipping. Like, she gives all of this, like, rich detail of the street, of the smell, of the feel. And so you really do feel immersed in that history that she's telling you, and you feel attached to the characters that you're reading about. I hate to say characters because they're real people, but it's a lot. And then one of the things she does that I think is also pretty brilliant is she takes the poetry of Angelina, who's the the daughter, really the firstborn free descendant of the Black side of the Grimke's. And she interweaves her poetry at the start of like each section of the book. Do you mind if I read like quick line of the poem? Okay. So this is a poem that Angelina Weld Grimke wrote in 1930. It's called Forgetting How to Weep. And I think you can interpret it in a lot of ways. But she says, I am the woman with the black skin. I am the laughing woman with the black face. I am living in the cellars in every crowded place. I am toiling just to eat in the cold and in the heat, and I laugh. I'm the laughing woman who's forgotten how to weep. I'm the laughing woman who's afraid to go to sleep. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's good. It's good. It's good. And it just, once you read the story, you understand what that poem means. But yeah, everybody should be giving it to each other as a gift.
Just one last quick question, and we'll get to other recommendations. But, you know, since this is the kind of episode where we're talking maybe a little bit more about like the practice of history and sort of, you know, this book I think straddles both. It's a work of history. It's also a work, I think, for a general audience. But like, is there anything in what you're describing that feels like it's a lesson for historical academic research or kind of the things to look for? Do you have a sense? I mean, I know you know Carrie a little bit. Do you have a sense of like what she did
we're
that feels
friends,
like
I will say that.
Is a lesson for you as someone who does this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it shows me, and this is what I've written a review for her book for The Nation, and one of the things I say is that like this book teaches us that capitalism won't save us. Like your hard efforts, that work ethic, these puritanical beliefs won't save us. They won't get us the liberation we're looking for. And I think in both the Black's family and in the white side of the family, they were both striving for like this higher plane of the sort of utopia society in which, you know, if everything were equal, everyone could sort of have access to everything. And it's just not true. And it's really messy, and that people bring a lot of their own baggage into the decisions that they're making. And that, I don't know, I say in the white side of the family, I think it's really hard to grow up in a slaveholding family, particularly a prominent slaveholding family, and not still have a lot of that residue on you. I think the Grimke sisters were never honest about their complicity within the institution of slavery. And I think that the Black Grimke family, you know, could never really reckon with their own trauma. Like that's, you know, slavery was traumatic, and they sort of refused to talk about the ways in which they had been harmed by it, but yet that harm still perpetuates itself in the following generation. So there are a lot of takeaways in this book that I just feel like, you know, looking back on it, I feel like we still have not arrived at a perfect formula that will get us to where we want to go. But it shows us what doesn't work.
Got a lot of those.
Let's move on. But I would be remiss also to say it's interesting. This is a book about a sort of remarkable family, and every time I encounter the Greenwiches, I just feel like we have to point out that they are a remarkable family, right? So we have Carrie here, who's the historian who wrote this book. Her sister is Caitlin Greenwich, who's an incredible novelist, and then her other sister is the playwright Kirsten Greenwich, and so it's just like, wow, what a family.
Yeah. They write plays and novels and history books. There should be a book
100 years from now, someone will write a book about the Greenwiches.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
Okay. Nikki, got a work of more academic-y history that you want to shout out?
I do, and I'm cheating a little bit because I had a chance to read this book over the past few months, but it's actually not coming out until 2023. But I'm going to flag it for folks because it is so good, and it is the book that I read this year that I was like, oh, there's so much more that you can do as a historian, and there's such a wider way of thinking about the things that I write about. It's a book called Dreamland by Carly Goodman, and it is I'll give you the subtitle as well. It's called Dreamland, America's Immigration Lottery in an Age of Restriction by Carly Goodman. And it looks at this kind of pretty small piece of policy in a way, something called the diversity lottery, which is implemented in like the 1980s, actually as a way of helping to bring more white Irish immigrants to the United States, because the changes in immigration law toward more skilled labor and sort of like making the immigration system less racist by opening it up to the global South meant that there were lots of Irish people who wanted to come to the United States, especially by the 1960s and 1970s when there were economic problems in Ireland. And they were coming to the United States, and they were in the United States without documentation. And there were high-powered politicians like Ted Kennedy who wanted to make more space for the Irish. But it wasn't actually great in the 1980s to be like, you know what, we need more white immigrants. Yeah. And so the way that they kind of worked around this was they created a diversity lottery for countries who were either not meeting their cap or who were underrepresented in the in immigration to the United States. And there were special set-asides, particularly for Irish immigrants. But this actually opened up immigration, particularly in places like, say, Ghana, where Carly spends part of her story, where the diversity lottery becomes this way for people with no other path to the United States because they don't have family migration links. They don't necessarily have the high-tech skills that would allow them to come over on a skilled visa or to immigrate as a skilled worker. But now, as long as they have a high school degree or its equivalent, they can enter this visa lottery and they can come to the United States and they can become U.S. citizens. And it becomes, in many ways, it's like an even better version of the Peace Corps. Like, it's this way of it's an American presence in the world in a way that feels just mostly good, which is not the way America is usually present in the world in the 1970s and 1980s. And of course, that all sounds delightful. And there is this way that I'm thinking of Ghana because Carly spends so much time there, but the way that people in Ghana start to imagine a different life in the United States, one that might involve moving to the United States, becoming a U.S. citizen and staying there, or it might involve going to the U.S., making money and bringing it back to Ghana. There's a lot of kind of internal debate in the country about what the best way to do this is. But as you can also imagine, because so many people invest so much hope in this, it is also scamapalooza. There are all these lawyers who are like, oh, if you pay me like $5,000, I'll get you to the top of the pack. They can't get you to the top of the pack. They can't do anything. But they're making people think that they have a better chance if they pay money for what is a free entry into this lottery. She also has an entire chapter on internet spam, the way that diversity lottery lawyers would come into Usenet boards on the early internet and just spam it, which is where some of the early ideas of spam on those social spaces comes out of. And it's so fascinating because that story very quickly then runs into something that I write about in my book, which is this rising age of nativism in the United States that is much more pro-white immigrant, anti any sort of licit or illicit immigration from any country where the immigrants aren't white. And Carly is actually very good at digging into that darker history as well. And so what I think is so astounding about this book, in addition to recovering this little bit of policy, is that it's talking about U.S. policy, but it is citing it in so many places. Like, there's a chapter where you spend your time in Ireland. There's a chapter where you spend your time in Uganda. There's a chapter where you spend your time in internet cafes all over the world. And that is, it's so sprawling, and yet it all hangs together in a way that I find really enticing, because the work that I do, I really like to, sort of write about politics in ways that ventures outside of Washington, D.C. But I have always written within the context of the United States. And to watch her, like, bounce from continent to continent is so exciting. And it is something that I hope to do in my future work as well.
Yay. I love that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And, it resonates just with me kind of, more as a journalist and who's worked on kind of narrative work. But like, I'm curious, that instinct or that push to let's go to another place and take another perspective. What holds that back? I mean, is it just like that's a lot more work, or is there just a concern there that like, oh, this will muddy the narrative and it's easier to just sort of stay focused in one place? Like, from a historian's perspective, like what prevents more people from doing that sprawling thing that you're describing?
There are a lot of things. One is resources. I should mention that Carly is a contingent historian, so her ability to do this kind of work for other books is really limited by the fact that she doesn't have an institutional home, and this kind of history takes money. It also took Carly living in Ghana for a while. It takes language skills. So her ability to write from the Latin America perspective requires her Spanish language skills. I have to say, a lot of U.S. historians do not have strong second language skills.
No, we do not. No,
when you said contingent historian, what's that?
Oh, yeah, sorry. She doesn't have a professorship. She doesn't have
she's an independent scholar.
She doesn't have an institutional home, which makes it possible to do things like not just go on research trips, because you often have a research fund as a historian if you're with a university, but also to do things like go to conferences to share your work. That costs money, and it's very difficult to do if you don't have an institution that's willing to pick up some of that weight, or an institution that's paying you a regular salary so that you can do this work as well.
Wow. Okay, I want to know, like, whenever you read these books, like, is there something that, because oftentimes we read so much that it's hard to be surprised, I think, by what we learn. What was it that you read in the book that you're like, didn't know that?
Well, I mean, I just think the idea of the diversity lottery being designed for white Irish immigrants blows my mind every time I think about it, because so many of these things, so the diversity lottery actually does become a pipeline for allowing many, many, many more people from the global South to immigrate to the United States. And so much of U.S. immigration policy in the second half of the 20th century is inadvertently diversity promoting. Like, it's inadvertently opening the doors to people from particularly the global South and to non-white immigrants. Even if you look at the lawmakers talking about it at the time, that is rarely ever their intention, which I also find super fascinating. Also, I should just say, I think this is probably true of the Grimkes as well. It's so well written. And I love when a book is well written.
And
love it.
This is a naive question, but I would I'll just ask it. Even in like scholarly papers or academic papers, I mean, good writing still matters and still pops out.
It pops out because it is not always the first quality that a historian focuses on.
No. It's a real skill, I think, to be able to blend sort of a journalistic, engaging tone with like deep historical archival work. You're either, I think historians' problem is mostly that they can give you the research, they can give you all the facts, but there's not going to be any color. Yeah. There's not going to be any sort of like, like flowery language attached to it. And sometimes with journalists, you get really beautiful language, but you don't always get all of the facts. So if you can blend both of those worlds, it really does make for a compelling book, because it's so much richer.
And we should say historians are probably light years ahead of many other disciplines on readability, but there still is a distinct difference between a lot of
literary critics. Oh my god, unreadable.
And we've talked about this on the show too, but there's also just kind of a larger thirst for historical work, and so there's like market incentives, for lack of a better word, to make your stuff readable and accessible. And I think that pushes in both directions, but largely speaking, I think if there's just a pressure towards we should be storytellers as well, I think that's largely a good thing.
Yes, and I think the field is moving that way. I think the field is moving more toward accessibility.
But there's still
certainly in
books. So one final question, then I want to do like a little speed round, kind of just shout out some other stuff. But on those lines, you know, it was pushing towards accessibility. There still have to have been, you don't have to get into the messy details, but there still have to be these little academic infighting moments, right? Those still exist, right?
Oh, yes.
People really getting up in arms about, you know, stuff that to us on the outside.
I read about slavery and the Civil War.
But those will always just assure me that all those little petty or very, very, you know, specific and esoteric academic fights still play out in the journals.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
And they also play out in public too. I mean, our listeners should Google Paul Kramer and Daniel Immerwahr if they want to read about some U.S. and the world fights that have happened in recent years.
Or, I mean, the 1619 Project.
Yeah. Well, wait.
Viral.
Was the Paul? We don't have to get into all this, but was that the editor of some journal who wrote this piece about pushing back against pop history? Did that happen this year?
No, you're thinking of, I think that you might be thinking of the head of the American Historical Association who wrote a piece on presentism that was, let's say, not clearly thought out. This is a fight about U.S. empire.
Oh, right. Okay.
Oh my gosh. And actually, you want historian fights. I mean, we won't go down this rabbit hole, but if listeners want to look at how historians responded to the New York Times Haiti reporting.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Enjoy that.
That was explosive, and I was here for every minute of it.
And, you know, and it's funny. I mean, you know, so much of it is, as is happening, I think, in a lot of other mediums. A lot of it plays out on Twitter, and sometimes that's really good because people can just like check each other or sort things out, and you don't have to wait for like the next quarterly issue of so-and-so to read a 5,000 word rebuke. Instead, it can just be a little back and forth on Twitter. And sometimes mostly people dig in and get mad, but sometimes they kind of like advance the conversation or they clarify things or hold people accountable. But, you know, I have my own personal Twitter feed, but then the This Day account, which I have access to, it mostly follows historians. And so I do get these glimpses of these like fights that are playing out of these little things. But I also, as you know, Twitter was potentially imploding towards the end of this year, saw a lot of historians be like, wow, you know, I really lament the potential loss of this platform because it's one of the many ways in which kind of historians are more visible now than they were before and can connect with each other and so forth. So, you know, not to make...
Yeah, and the correction, I think, can come in real time. Yeah. I'm forgetting this exact story, but it was like someone was producing a documentary and they're like, oh, there's never been a book on this. And then scholars are like, actually, there's this book and this book and this book.
I wasn't going to say it, but it does seem like so many of these fights are mostly just about credit, you know. And
there are a lot of turf wars.
Who got it first?
The turf war is real.
You know, the reaction to the Haiti stuff was in the New York Times. A lot of it was substantive, but a lot of it was also like, well, I wrote this in a journal 7 years ago, and it's like, sure, but you know. Anyway, I don't want to stick my nose in that one. All right, quick speed rounds on any other sort of academic-y work, and then I'm sure we have tons of more kind of pop or whatever you want to call it, popular historian stuff, history stuff to shout out for next episode. But any quick ones you want to mention here?
There's another book. It is really academic, but I think it's also accessible. It's Dennis Tyler, Disabilities of the Color Line, Redressing Anti-Blackness from Slavery to the Present. It is a book that I have not been able to put down. It's so good. And it just talks about like how should we rethink disabilities and Blackness and how Blackness can sometimes immobilize you and the ways in which that plays out from slavery to the present.
And I know Dennis Tyler because he was a guest on Operdemics, and if he writes at all like he talks, then I think people would love this book because he was so compelling.
I could hear his voice in my head while I was reading.
Super compelling thinker and storyteller. So yeah, and at Fordham, right? I have to shout out Fordham. Where I went
Fordham.
For a few years.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
And in the year of Dobbs, I want to recommend Jen Holland's Tiny U, a Western history of the anti-abortion movement, which actually does a really good job. I mean, it tells the political grassroots movement history, but it also really drills down on the pro-life culture wars in the sense of all of the sort of culture materiel and the tchotchkes of the anti-abortion movement, which is actually how I experienced the anti-abortion movement as a young Catholic student. It was through things like these little feet pins that you would wear that were the size of a fetus's feet at 10 weeks, and the t-shirts and the documentaries and all of these ways that the anti-abortion movement not only went after the hearts and minds of people, but really indoctrinated a generation of young people, including myself, into the anti-abortion movement. I thought it was an absolutely fascinating book.
I'm checking that out.
Okay. And then as we wrap up, the one thing I'll throw out there is, and this is a little bit looking forward to next year, but remember we did that episode on LBJ and the Texas election and that box 13 and that box of votes that got found in the middle in this small desert town that tipped the election to LBJ. And on it, we had a guest from the LBJ library. And in that episode, he said, we just got a whole new cache of papers and information about this story. And so, I'm sitting here waiting for this one particular academic at UT Austin at the LBJ library to do his work and then reveal to us what those papers show. But that is the piece of academia I'm looking forward to.
Mark, if you're listening, get on it.
I'm very curious. Yeah. Stop what you're doing and get to it. But
put down the eggnog. Pick up some books.
All right, great. Well, those are all great. And, maybe we'll put all these in the newsletter so people can subscribe to that at thisdaypod.com, or you can just find a link and read it if you don't want to subscribe. And then...
and maybe, Jody,
Yeah.
Kelly and I can throw in a few other recommendations
Exactly.
we didn't get to.
Exactly.
So that if you're subscribed to the newsletter, you get even more
There you go.
recommendations.
Then you know how to sell it. Yes, exactly. And if this sparks for anyone, if there's anyone out there who's a historian or likes to just read academic work, and you have stuff you want to suggest, especially, again, stuff that feels like it changed your thinking or taught you something in terms of your own work, please tell us about it. And then also, if you have any questions for us whatsoever for our Ask Us Anything episode, get in touch. You can do that through our website, thisdaypod.com, or email us, thisdaypod@gmail.com. All right, next episode is a little more popular history, podcasts, books, Twitter threads, magazine articles, whatever. We'll do that next episode. We'll be right back with that. But for now, I say thank you to Nicole Hemmer.
Thank you, Jody.
And thanks to Kelly Carter Jackson.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.